let's talk about a possible career path when you know Python. And one is testing and automation. Now, what is that? Why would we use this? Well, think about it. If, let's say, you had a company that was working on an app, you want to make sure that this app works properly. And what a lot of companies do is hire people who can help with testing. Now, we have a section on testing with Python in this course, where we write unit tests through code. But usually when people work with applications, we're human users. We perhaps touch the screen if the app is on an iPad. Perhaps we scroll through and submit a form. We need to test and automate these steps to make sure our applications work. And companies hire Python developers in order to help with automation. You see, through programming, we can actually interact with something like a browser or an app and mimic human actions to make sure that the application works as expected. Now, this isn't just for phone apps. This works all across software. If you're working with software, you want to make sure that it works properly. And instead of hiring thousands of people to test your app, you could totally do that. You can also, through code, mimic thousands, millions of users playing through your app and testing out your application. So, in the next couple of videos, I'm going to show you how a testing automation person might work with Python. It's going to be a fun one. Through code, we're going to perform actions on the browser. Let's get started. Now, one of the best tools for browser automation is Selenium. And Selenium works not just with Python, but with lots of programming languages. But what it gives us is the ability to browse or use a browser without a human involved. Just through code, we can act and move around the mouse, click on buttons, and interact with a website. And in this section, we're going to be using Selenium. Now, in order to install Selenium, as you can see, we'll have to use pip install. Now, at the bottom here, you see that it says you may consider using virtual env to create isolated Python environments. Now, we already know about this, right? You could install pip install like this and have it available across your entire machine. Or you can use something like pip env to install it just for your specific project. Or you can use PyCharm and use their automatic virtual environments. Now, we've covered those topics in the other videos, so I won't here. In my case, I'm just going to install it globally like this. So I'm going to get started. First, we're going to install Selenium. So I'm going to say pip, in my case, pip3, install Selenium. Awesome. Now, once you have Selenium installed, you can create a file. In my case, I have an automation.py file here. Let's make this a little bit bigger and this a little bit bigger. Let me clear this. Now, the next step is to, import in our file. So I can say import, or actually from Selenium package that we just installed, we can say import WebDriver. Now, WebDriver is going to allow us to drive the web through code. However, in order for us to be able to use Selenium properly, if you go to the installation page here, you see that there's something called drivers. You see, Selenium works with these drivers because each browser, like Chrome, Edge, Firefox, and Safari, has different drivers to interface with the different browsers. So based on what browser you want to use to automate things, you have to install each of these drivers. In our case, let's use the Chrome driver. So we would just click over here, and you can see over here that we have the different Chrome drivers that we can use. You have the current releases, so the latest versions. Now, usually the latest releases are not what we call stable. That is, maybe they're just brand new, so they haven't been tested enough. So what I like to do is to actually go to the Chrome driver tab here and make sure that we select the latest stable release. So based on when you watch this video, This version number might be a little bit higher, but as long as it's a stable release instead of the latest beta release, which is Chrome driver 76, then that's fine. So let's click over here, and you'll see that as soon as I click here, it'll give me zip files that I can install based on my machine. Now, in my case, I'm using a Mac, so I'll just install the Mac driver. And once I open up the zip file, you'll see that I get this Chrome driver executable. Now, an executable is kind of like a .exe on a Windows machine. If I double click this, it's going to run some code. It's some binary code that we can run on the machine. But this is our Chrome driver. This is going to allow Selenium to be able to open up our Chrome browser and manipulate that browser. Now, in my case, I'm going to move this to my desktop because that's where my automation Python file is. There we go. Now, if I close this, and by the way, if you go to PyPy and click on Selenium, the package, it'll actually explain some of these installation steps as well. So you can actually run through this quick setup as well. Now, in our case, now that we have the Chrome driver, what we need to do is to now create an instance of the browser. So let's just call this Chrome browser. And this is going to equal the web driver that we just imported. And then in here, use Chrome as the browser. And then inside as the parameter, remember this is the Chrome class that WebDriver gives us, we have to give it the driver in order to drive the browser. Now, because our Chrome driver is in the same directory as my file, I can just do a // or use a string and say Chrome driver, which is the name of the driver. Now, let's make this a little bit smaller so we can see everything. Now, in here, if we had multiple projects, we'd ideally use Chrome driver, not just copy and paste Chrome driver everywhere into our project folders, but instead, you'd put it into your path. What does that mean? Well, just like when we installed Selenium, when we did pip3 install Selenium, usually when you install something globally, or when you have it available globally, if you're on a Mac or Linux computer, you usually will put it under user local bin folder, and you'd put it inside of this folder. If you're on a Windows, you'd usually put it in its path in the Windows folder of the C drive. And if you do that, you can actually just keep this as blank. And the driver will actually look for the Chrome driver in this path. But in our case, we'll just leave it like this. So make sure that the Chrome driver is in the same folder as the file. Now in here, let's print out what we have as a Chrome browser. So I'm going to just run this file. Oh, and I get an error during handling of the above exception. All right, it looks like I get a file not found error, and that's because I made a little typo here. It should be Chrome driver. So let's save that again, give that another go. And did you see that? Chrome just opened up for me. So right now, automatically by running Chrome browser, I got an instance of the Chrome browser. So let's see what we can do here. Let's say we change our browser to just be like this. If I go here and do Chrome browser dot maximize window and run this method, let's run our file. Now, when we run this, nothing happened. And the reason is, you see over here that we get an error, and you might get this as well. It says, not created, exception, message, session not created. This version of Chrome driver only supports Chrome version 75. So you have to make sure that the driver that you install, in our case, it was the stable one, is compatible with the version of Chrome that you have. most likely you'll have to update your Chrome version. So you see over here that I have version 74. But in here it says, hey, this is compatible only with Chrome version 75. So how can we fix this? We're simply going to relaunch. I've updated my Chrome version. Again, if you're not sure how to do that, you simply go to Chrome and go to About Google Chrome or Preferences, and you'll be able to update to the latest version or make sure that you're using the version that matches your driver. Now that we have version 75, let's try this again. I'm going to run my file. And look at that. I get Chrome is being controlled by an automated test software. So I've just created a new window, a new instance, which is what we've done here with the Chrome browser. And I've just said maximize window. Now, if I remove maximize window here, and I simply run this again, you see that right now I have another window, this time with the window, well, not maximized, just the default sizing. So every time I run this, I create a new instance of the browser. Very, very cool. Now, let's close these for now. And in the next video, we're going to explore how we can use this to actually move through web pages. Now, if you haven't gotten this far, take your time to make sure that the versions match, that you're able to run a browser from your command line. And in the next video, we're going to do some really cool things. I'll see you in that one. Bye-bye. Let's start getting into some interesting things we can do with Selenium. Now, what we're going to use for this exercise is going to be this website called seleniumeasy.com. Specifically, the /test part, because this website gives us a nice testing ground for us to play with a website. For example, if I do input forms here and do simple form demo, I can actually use this website to test out, typing stuff in, showing message, and seeing if we can do this with just code. So the first thing I'm going to do is copy this URL. And in our case, we'll just pick input forms and simple form demo. Later on, you can try it by yourself, trying out different things. But this tries to mimic most website functionalities, like form inputs, tables, alerts, and modals, and allows you to test your code really nicely. So let's copy this URL. And the first thing I'm going to do is, well, we're automation testers. We don't really manually type things in anymore. We let Selenium do that for us. So the first thing I'm going to do is say, hey, Chrome browser, I want you to get this URL. In my case, I'm going to say, hey, this is the URL that I just copied and pasted. Chrome browser, just get that for me. So let's run that code. And check it out. I've opened up the browser with Selenium and it took me to the URL that I specified. So most of the times, this is going to be your first line where we go to a specific URL. Now, I want a window to be maximized. So once again, we'll just say Chrome browser, and I'll say maximize window so that we'll have a full-fledged window this time around. Now, I'm going to close this once again because every time we run this code, a new window is going to open up. So let's just close it for now. Now, the next thing I want to do is to check that we're on the right page. Now, the way Selenium works is that it's going to look at this page and try to grab elements or find elements in this page. And it uses HTML that this page is built on to do this. Now, HTML simply is if I right-click on anything in the page and I click on Inspect, a developer console is going to show up. And in the Elements tab over here, it actually shows you how the page is structured using HTML. HTML is what allows web pages to get displayed in a browser, and they simply contain information about each element. In our case, see over here how it says complete automation testing tutorials? HTML says, hey, I want you to write this text right here. So that let's say we go to the name and slogan, or let's open up this. We see that we have Selenium made easy right here. We have an image, which is right over here. Essentially, HTML allows us to display some text and some basic content on a website. So with Selenium, we're able to grab these elements and check them and modify them and do what we want. Let's go all the way up and show you this. Each HTML page always has a title tag. And a title is simply what gets displayed up here at the top. In our case, it says Selenium Easy Demo. So what I can do is actually copy this and say, hey, in our code, is the string Selenium Easy Demo, is that in Chrome browser dot title? Now let's just print here and see what we get. I'm going to run this code. The browser opens up, and if I go back to the code, look at that, I get true, because that text is in the title. If I do something like Python Easy Demo, and I run this, you'll see that I'll get false. Now, an easier way for us to check our code than just running print all the time is to use the assert keyword that comes with Python. Now, you won't see this around too much because what's going to happen here is if we assert something, if this returns false, it's going to actually error out and exit out of the code. So if I run this, you'll see that I get an error with an assertion error. So this is a good way for us to test if something exists or not. But let's go back to what we had before, which is Selenium Easy Demo. That should give us true and not error in our code. Now, another thing here is we probably have a ton of windows here. So let's close them up. And don't worry, I'll show you how to actually close these later on if we want. So I showed you how I'm able to extract the title from here. Another thing I can do is, let's say, hey, I see over here in my HTML that there's a head tag and then there's also a body tag. So here, could I do something like, hey, assert body? If I click run here, it looks like we're not able to grab body. So what can we do here? Well, another way for us to interact with a page like this is using selectors. Now, the selectors, I'll provide a link to some of the cheat sheet here that we can use. But the selectors are simply ways for us to grab items from a page. We can grab items by ID, by name, by class name, by tag name, by link text. There's a ton of different things that we can do. Now, to show you over here how that would look like, if I go to the HTML page, over here, the elements, you'll see that if we wanted to grab, let's say in our case, we want to grab this button, well, I can right click, click inspect, and see over here that I have the button. It has a type, it has a class, and it has some text, which is show message. If I go to the cheat sheet, I see here that I can grab things by different options. We can do it by CSS, we can do it by the link text, we can do it by tag name, we can do it by class name. And you see here that it says driver.find element by class name. So this is how we can select it. So let's do that. I'm going to copy and paste this and simply say, hey, Chrome browser, I want you to find element by class name. And what was the class name that we used? Well, in our case, the class name is, let's say, button default. So I'm going to say btn default. And this is going to be our button. So if I run this and simply print button like this, if I run my code, you'll see here that I'm able to grab from the Selenium WebDriver a web element. And it looks like it's an element. I'm not really sure what's happening here, but we are grabbing something, a button. Now, this button element that we've grabbed is exactly like we see it here. If I, again, inspect the element, we've captured this part of the code. So this Selenium now contains this button for us to use. And as a shortcut here, you see over here how it says $$0. This actually allows us to select this element and use it in what we call the console. So if I clear the console and just say $0, you'll see that this is the element that we have captured. Now in here, there's different ways that we can interact with it. One of the ways is to say something like get attribute and an attribute called inner HTML. Now, inner HTML is simply going to grab whatever is between inside of this HTML, which is the button, and then you can see over here that the button's closing. So we want to grab the show message. If I do something like this, let's say we call this button text, and we print the button text. If I run this, I'll actually get an error because you can see here that I did the syntax wrong. I tried to print the button text and then got the attributes. So instead, make sure we move the brackets like this and run the code again. There we go. You see over here that we have show message. So I was able to, through code, inspect the page, find out what I want to control. In this case, maybe it's this button. And I was able to grab the text using the get attribute method. Again, all these methods I will link to. They all are something that you just have to get used to when you get into automation. But if you understand basic HTML, then they're quite easy to understand. There's actually not a lot of them. I would say there's probably 20 or so really useful methods that you can learn and use. But you know what? Right now, this isn't that exciting. I mean, yeah, sure, we've opened up a browser. We got to, look at a button and display the text that it shows. But I want to actually mimic something that we would do on a browser. Let's say we had this input. And I want to modify this HTML page where I enter some sort of text. I click show message, and just like as if I'm signing into a website or upvoting on Reddit. Let's automate that in the next video. All right, it's time to do something useful with our Selenium driver. We want to try and grab this input, put some text in it, then click on show message, just like we would on a website, maybe where we're trying to sign in automatically to test the sign in functionality or to test some sort of a form functionality in our app. How can we do this? Well, let me clear this first, just so we have a clean palette, and start with a few things. The first thing I like to do when working with Selenium is to make sure that as we progress through the code, we're doing things correctly by using these assert commands. So I can say assert, and we want to assert that this button text, which we're going to use, which is show message, we want to assert that this show message actually exists on our page. Now, an easy way to check this is to say Chrome browser, and instead of title, we want to just check the page source. And page source is simply, if I right click here and look at the view page source, is simply the HTML version of the entire website that we see, which should have the show message button. So by doing this, hopefully, if everything works up until line 12, we should just get true without any errors. So let's run that. All right, we don't get any errors. Everything is good. Now let's move on. The first thing I want to do is grab this input. So I'm going to inspect. Or let's close this so we have a better view of this. And use inspect on the input. We see that the input over here has it has an ID of user message. So we can grab this with ID, if you remember. And we scroll up to our cheat sheet here. We see that we can grab elements by ID using the find element by ID method. So let's do that. I'm going to say Chrome browser dot find element by ID, and the ID name that I wanted to grab was the user message. So let's do that. I'm going to say user message. And the first thing I want to do now that we've grabbed this ID is I want to make sure that there's no text in here, maybe from a previous user. So usually when grabbing inputs, I'll do something like user message. Let's create a new variable here called user message. And I'm going to say user message dot clear to clear wherever is in the input. And then from there, oh, and let's make sure this is underscore like this. And then from here, we can use the send keys. And send keys says, hey, in the user message, send these keystrokes as if a user is typing and give it the string. Let's do I am extra cool. That's kind of silly, but that should be fine. So we're going to mimic typing I am extra cool into that input after we've cleared it. So let's see if this works. I'm going to run. Whoa, how cool is that? Do you see that? We just automated typing into a box and it says, I am extra cool. Awesome. Now the next step is we want to grab this button and then simulate a click on it so that your message gets displayed on here. If I click show message, you see that I get this printed. Let's close some of our browsers because I feel like we have a ton of Selenium browsers open right now. That's better. So now that we have this, once again, we can select the button. So remember, we can select the button just like this. But, well, let's not call it button text. And I like being specific here, so let's call this show message button. Now this show message button, which we've grabbed before, the first thing we want to do is to, well, simulate a click. Just like that. So we send keys and then we click. So let's see if that works. I'm going to save this and run. Looks like that didn't work. Let me check what happened. We get a name error. Button text is not defined. Oh, and that's because we did not fix the naming in here in the print function. So let's just change the name here. We can actually just comment this out because we don't need to print it anymore. And let's run it again. Whoa, did you see that? Also, did you notice how fast that happened? I am extra cool. It got click show message and now my message appears. Very, very cool. Let's say that we wanted to grab this information. What can we do? Well, once again, we can right click. So let's use our default. Let's right click, inspect, And you can guess by now that this is starting to get easy. We see that we have the ID of display. So we're going to grab that and say this is going to be the output message. And the output message will be the Chrome browser dot find element by ID and give it the display. And maybe now, to verify that this is working, I'm going to do an assert method and say, hey, I want to assert that the I am extra cool, how many O's is that? 4 O's, that looks right, is in the output message. And what we want to do is to actually see the text. So we can actually say the inner HTML, like we've done here with get attribute, or we can just say text. So if I run this, no errors, everything is working. Now, this is a simple example, but did you notice how fast everything happened? I mean, if a human was to do this, you'd have to select here and type this in. Then you have to click show message, and then your message finally gets displayed. The reason testing automation is such an important part of software development is that you can do things really, really fast. You let the machine control the browser extremely fast so you can test as many times as you want, millions of times. You can simulate clicks, you can enter information, just anything that a human can do, Selenium lets you use as well. Now I want to show you one other way to select that is very, very common. We've seen that we can do find element by ID, find element by class name, but another very useful one is something called Chrome browser dot find element. Instead of class name, we use something called CSS selector. And CSS selector, we're not going to learn CSS here, but CSS in a browser is the styling that you get. So for example, if I was to look at the button and I do inspect, you see that the class has button default. And in a class, this is what we call CSS. This tells it, hey, these are the styles that we want. You can see over here in the styles tab that we have button default and button. And this controls our styles on a web page. For example, if I uncheck this, my button, well, now has no styling. If I uncheck some of this as well, again, the button styling goes away. So we're actually able to use CSS selectors, again, something that you can Google on your own, or I teach my other courses, to actually grab this. So the way we would do something like this and grab button default is to use the, let's say, CSS class dot button. And this is a CSS selector. For example, if I wanted to grab all buttons that are under the form get input, which is ID get input, then I would do pound, which stands for ID, get input. And then say all forms that have the ID get input and anything that is a child button, I want you to grab. So that if I do user message or user button, I'll say 2 here. If I print this out now and say user button 2, this should have been selector, not select. Let's fix that. You see that I'm able to grab this element that way as well. All right, let's take a break because check out all the windows that I just opened up. This is getting a little insane. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to close all of these. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Welcome back, Automation Masters. Now, up until this point, we've ran this code quite a bit of times, and you see that now I have a ton of Chrome browsers open. That's not good. How do we close these things? Well, quite easily, actually. All we have to do is say Chrome browser.close. Now, this close method is going to close our browsers. However, a lot of people sometimes have issues with this method because browsers are constantly being updated. And sometimes Selenium has some bugs where it doesn't close this properly. So this may work for you. Now, in my case, if I run this, all right, well, that actually worked. But there are instances where this won't work. So you might have to actually call this twice to make sure that it closes the instance. Now, using close is going to close the current window that it's open, which is what we're doing here. With quit, you actually get to close the entire Chrome driver. So let's do quit now and see if this works. All right, so that also quit the browser, but if in your code for some reason you're opening up the browser twice, it's going to quit all sessions. Unfortunately, because these ones are all past instances, it's not going to know how to quit them. We should have, quit them from before. So you're going to have to manually close these for now. But at least now you know that you just add this at the end. Sorry for showing you how to do that at the very end. But I had to keep it open so I can explain all these things that are happening to you. But ideally, you quit the browser afterwards. Now, this quit and close actually causes a lot of headaches, and sometimes it may not work on a browser. This depends on the versions that you have installed. There's a ton of forums online that you can look up and say, hey, why isn't my browser quitting? So it's a heavily debated thing that you can find information online on. If it doesn't work for you, you might have to call this twice, or you might have to check that the version you're using is working properly. Now, some of you might be asking, this gives you a lot of power, right? Because, I can start writing bots to go through websites. Maybe I want to write a little bot that goes on every single Reddit post and upvotes it. Or maybe I click like on a Facebook page over and over and over. Maybe there's a voting contest going on, and I can just write scripts to automate people signing in, random people signing in, and upvoting, let's say, your submission. So there's many good ways to use automation and many bad ways to use automation. Maybe you want to send personal messages to your Facebook friends. Well, you can automate it and message thousands of them all at the same time using something like Selenium. But you see, websites are smarter than that, because most websites will detect when it's a robot controlling it versus when there's a human, because of how fast things are happening. No human is going to be able to send keys and click that fast, right? So Selenium actually has thought of that. If we actually go back here to the site that I originally showed you, which I'll link to, if you scroll all the way down to waits, waits allows us to actually wait and simulate actions at a bit of a delay. So most people that write automation scripts on websites will use something like sleep or wait to make sure that there's pauses in between actions, so that, websites aren't going to say, hey, this is definitely not a human. I'm going to block their usage. For example, here on the Udemy website, I tried to write a script that did things really, really fast, and you'll see that Udemy actually blocks my activity and says, hey, please verify that you're a human. So that it says, hey, I'm detecting something that makes me believe that this isn't a human. I don't want our servers to get logged with all this activity because, companies like Udemy have to pay for, let's say, interactions on the website because they're talking to backend servers. So you'll notice some of these things. And you want to be careful with automation that you're usually testing on your own product or your company's product, and that you're not abusing the other websites and trying to, let's say, game the system. But using something like wait actually allows you to at least not do things as fast as possible so you don't get detected as easily as possible. With great power comes great responsibility. And Selenium is a great tool for testing. A lot of companies hire testers and automation testers for this specific reason. And it's a great career option for you. However, you can also do bad things with this. So be responsible. Don't do anything that might get you in trouble. Not advocating for anything of that. But I hope this gave you a little test into what automation testers do. And you can use Selenium not just on browsers. You can use them pretty much on any screen. You can run them on Android devices, iOS devices, pretty much any screen. I hope that was fun, and I'll see you in another video.